I thought it might be helpful, since the Appia position is not as well developed in the readings as it might be, to have a look at an argument for an Appia-style position. That is, an argument for the conclusion that racial categories are empty. So here's one. It isn't Appia's argument. It's based on Joshua Glasgow's contribution to a book called What is Race, that actually came up when I was talking to Sally Haslanger. Anyway, here's the argument. Premise 1, races are not social categories. Premise 2, races are not human continental populations or anything similar. Premise 3, if there are American Indians or Asians or whatever, then either races are social categories or races are human continental populations or similar. Conclusion, there are no American Indians, Asians, whites, blacks, Pacific Islanders, and so on, i.e. racial categories are empty. Okay, that's the argument. Of course, we need some support for the premises, so let's start by supporting the first premise: races are not social categories. Imagine that humans don't change physically, but come to ignore race entirely. It becomes of no political or cultural significance at all. To strengthen the point, we could even imagine that societies dissolve and people decide to go their separate ways and live as hermits. But let's stick with the first possibility. That gives us an argument that race is not social because, plausibly, if people are Pacific Islanders, white, black, and so on, then they would still be Pacific Islanders, white, black, and so on, in the above colorblind scenario. Being blind to race doesn't make it go away. But it would if racial categories were social categories of some sort. If your membership in a particular race depends on how you're treated or regarded by members of your society, then your membership in that category is going to lapse if the relevant treatment ends. So, granted premise P1, we get the conclusion: racial categories are not social categories. Okay, now let's try and support the second premise of our overall argument, that no one is a member of any race. Imagine that we infuse the global water supply with a chemical that makes everyone, quoting from Glasgow, end up looking exactly and permanently like the Dalai Lama. That gives us the following argument. Premise 1. Race has disappeared in this scenario because we look the same. There aren't any black people in a world of only Dalai Lamas, but there are still people with recent ancestry that is entirely from sub-Saharan Africa. If there are races, Glasgow thinks, they have to be visibly distinct populations. That's why he thinks that in the case where everyone ends up looking like the Dalai Lama, race goes away. So, granted premise P1, we get the conclusion that races are not human continental populations or anything similar. So back to the argument, the overall argument. We've supported the first premise, we've supported the second premise, and we can support the third premise by asking, well, what else could race be? And noting that no alternative answer seems to suggest itself. Okay, so that's an argument for racial eliminativism, the view that no one is a member of any race. Now it is time to segue from race to gender, and a pair of events occurring about 5 years ago provide a nice way of doing that.